In a house poisoned by silence and fear, they blamed the only one who still had a voice. They saw a problem dog, not the anchor holding their broken family together. This is the story of what happens when you throw away the only thing keeping you from sinking.
Before the silence became a permanent guest at the dinner table, there was laughter. Laughter that echoed through the hallways and spilled into the garden, as abundant as the California sunlight. Before the storm, there was the brilliant, unwavering calm of a life that seemed to have been pulled directly from a catalog of dreams. The Miller family wasn't just happy, they were a living portrait of it, hung in the gilded frame of suburban success. Each member of the family was a pillar. Mark, the structural engineer, was the foundation, a man whose confidence was as solid as the bridges he designed. Sarah, the teacher, was the walls, protective, warm, the heart that held everyone together. Josh, at 16, was the roof, reaching for his own place in the sky, yet still sheltering what was below. And little Emily, with her 8 years, was the window, seeing the world with a clarity and a joy the rest of them had long since forgotten. But every house needs a door, something that connects the inner world to the outer, something that welcomes everyone with an unconditional joy. And that door had a wet nose and a tail that never stopped wagging. His name was Copper. He was more than a beagle. He was the daily promise that no matter how complicated the world outside became, in here, love was simple. He was the keeper of Emily's secrets, whispered into his floppy ear. He was Josh's silent confidant, the one being on the planet who didn't care about his grades or his teenage moods. For Mark and Sarah, he was the living proof that they had made it. He was the luxury of a love that asked for nothing in return, the steady, happy heartbeat at the very center of their perfect home.
But portraits, no matter how perfect they seem, are only paper. Foundations, no matter how solidly built, can tremble. Life has a way of finding the fault lines, the small, invisible fissures in the structure of our happiness. For the Miller family, the first crack appeared on a Tuesday, a day so ordinary and unremarkable its memory would become a cruel irony. It didn't come with a bang, but with the sterile quiet of a corporate video call, a voice from 1,000 miles away calmly dismantling a man's world. Mark, the engineer, the man who saw the world in terms of angles, loads, and breaking points, never saw his own coming. The word they used was redundant, a clean, clinical, almost polite word for an act of existential brutality. His position, his team, 20 years of his professional identity were declared redundant, extinct. He wasn't fired for failure, he was eliminated for efficiency. And that truth was somehow infinitely worse. There was no one to blame, no mistake to correct, no enemy to fight. He was just a number on a spreadsheet, and his number was no longer required. He didn't tell them, not at first. How could he possibly translate the collapse of his universe into words that would fit at the dinner table, somewhere between pass the salt and how was school? So he carried the secret. But a secret of this magnitude doesn't stay quiet. It breathes. It exhales a cold that seeps under doors and through floorboards. Mark became a ghost in his own home, a specter haunted by the man he was just that morning. The sound of Emily's laughter felt too loud, a mockery of his silent panic. Sarah's gentle questions felt like sharp interrogations. Josh's teenage silence felt like an accusation. The very air in the house, once light and full of oxygen, grew thin and heavy, thick with the pressure of an unspoken truth, waiting to implode.
Animals are mirrors. They don't reflect our faces, but our feelings.
reflecting the storms we try to hide within ourselves. And Copper, a creature tuned to the subtle, unspoken frequencies of human emotion, felt the tremor long before anyone spoke of an earthquake. He couldn't understand the words redundant or unemployed, but he was fluent in the language of a clenched jaw, a shortened temper, and the scent of fear that now clung to Mark like a second skin. The dog's world, once a predictable rhythm of walks, meals, and affection, had lost its tempo. His joyful energy, the very essence of his being, began to curdle into a nervous, vibrating anxiety. The confident bark that once greeted the mailman became a high-pitched, uncertain whine at passing shadows. He would startle at sounds that never bothered him before, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of leaves outside the window. His world had become unpredictable, and therefore unsafe. The silence of his humans was a siren he couldn't ignore, a complex puzzle he desperately tried to solve by digging in the garden, pacing the length of the hallway, his body becoming a vessel for the unspoken panic that now saturated their home. Sarah saw it. She saw the worry in the dog's deep brown eyes and recognized it as a reflection of her own growing unease. She would find him lying by the front door, waiting for a version of Mark that no longer came home, a man who didn't carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. But Mark saw something else entirely. He didn't see a reflection of his own fear. He saw chaos. He saw disorder. He saw another problem in a life that had suddenly become full of them, and he was beginning to resent it.
Stress is a predator. It stalks the weakest parts of our spirit, and when it cannot consume us from within, it demands a target. It is a venom that begs to be injected, to be released into the world to prove it exists. And Mark, drowning in a silent sea of polite rejection letters and the crushing weight of his own perceived failure, finally found his target. It wasn't his former boss, a faceless name on an email. It wasn't his wife, whose worried glances felt like daggers of pity. It was the one creature in the house who couldn't talk back, who couldn't defend himself with logic or reason. Every bark from Copper was no longer a simple canine sound. It was a personal insult, a shrill commentary on Mark's inability to provide peace and quiet. Every hole dug in the garden wasn't a sign of a dog's boredom. It was another bill, another repair, another layer of financial shame. The click-clack of Copper's nails on the hardwood floor at night wasn't the sound of a loyal pet, but the pacing of a jailer, reminding Mark of his own imprisonment within the walls of his home. The dog, once the living symbol of his success, had twisted in his mind to become the breathing, panting embodiment of his failure. It was irrational. It was profoundly unfair. But for a man who had lost all control of his professional life, exerting control over the problem dog became a desperate, last-ditch obsession. The love and patience he once had were eroded, replaced with a short-fused irritation. The final straw wasn't a straw at all. It was a mountain, a single event that would allow all his pent-up rage and grief to finally, catastrophically erupt.
It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon, the sky outside weeping a cold gray misery that matched the mood inside the house. Mark had been working for days on a freelance project, a complex architectural model that represented more than just a potential paycheck. It was a lifeline. It was proof that he was still an engineer, still capable, still a man who could build things rather than just watch them fall apart. The model was his last flickering hope, a fragile miniature of a future he desperately needed to believe in. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke, and with the first clap of thunder, Copper's simmering anxiety boiled over. He hated storms. The unpredictable booms of thunder were a terrifying assault on his senses. Frantic, he sought comfort, seeking the safety of his pack, his humans. He scratched at Mark's office door, whining, a desperate plea for reassurance, but the door remained closed. The only response was a sharp, angry, "Quiet, dog!" from the other side. Driven by a fear he couldn't contain, he began to run through the house, his panic escalating with each thunderous crash. It was in this blind, terrified state that he collided with the table in the dining room, the one holding the model. The sound was not loud, just a sickening crunch of delicate balsa wood and plastic. When Mark, drawn by the noise, opened his door, the scene before him was one of utter devastation. His last hope, the intricate symbol of his potential comeback, lay in pieces on the floor. And standing in the middle of the wreckage, trembling, was Copper. In that instant, Mark didn't see a scared animal. He saw a saboteur. He saw malice. He saw the deliberate, final destruction of his ambition. The verdict was passed, not in a court of law, but in the shattered heart of a desperate man.
The decision, when it was finally spoken aloud, was made in a cold, chilling silence that was far louder than the rage that preceded it. There was no debate, no family meeting. There was only Mark's hollow, final declaration, a sentence delivered with the dead-eyed certainty of a man who had already closed his heart. He's making things worse. He's out of control. He has to go. Sarah pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper, trying to reason with a man who was no longer capable of reason. Josh stood frozen in the hallway, his face a white mask of disbelief and betrayal, watching his father become a stranger. Emily, hearing the tone but not the words, simply began to cry, a silent, intuitive grief for a loss she could already feel in the air. But it was like throwing stones at a fortress. Mark's shame had built walls so high no love could get over them. The drive to the county shelter was a blur of rain-streaked windshields and a suffocating unspoken betrayal. Copper, sensing a shift but not understanding its finality, sat in the passenger seat. He didn't whine or tremble. He simply watched Mark, his head cocked, as if trying to solve this final, confusing puzzle. When they arrived, he licked Mark's hand, his tail giving a single hopeful thump against the seat, believing, even then, that they were just on another of their adventures. It was the final, devastating twist of the knife. Mark unclipped the leash, handed it to a stranger, and walked away, leaving the sound of a single confused bark echoing behind him in the sterile hallway, a final damning verdict on a love he had just discarded.
Mark expected relief. He expected the quiet he had so desperately craved. He expected that by removing the perceived source of the chaos, his home would return to a state of peace, allowing him the space to think, to rebuild. He was wrong. The house did fall silent, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. The problem wasn't gone. It had just lost its voice, and in its absence, the true sickness of the house was revealed. Without Copper to act as the family's emotional lightning rod, the unspoken anxieties and resentments had nowhere to go. They ricocheted off the walls, poisoning the very air they breathed. Josh locked himself in his room not with teenage moodiness, but with a cold adult fury. The one being who had offered him unconditional acceptance was gone, betrayed by the man he was supposed to look up to.
The bond between father and son, already strained, was now severed. Emily, too young to understand the complexities of adult failure, understood only absence. She stopped drawing. Her colorful world of chalk and crayons turned to a muted gray. She would sit by Copper's empty water bowl, a silent vigil for a friend she thought was coming back. Sarah watched it all, her heart breaking in a slow, continuous ache. She and Mark circled each other like strangers in a museum of their own failed life, the unspoken blame a vast, uncrossable chasm between them. It was then, in that hollow, echoing quiet, that Mark was forced to confront the catastrophic truth. He hadn't gotten rid of the problem. He had gotten rid of the family's heart.
The realization didn't dawn on him slowly. It hit him like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the air from his lungs. It happened as he watched his daughter, Emily, mechanically pushing food around her plate at dinner, her eyes empty. He saw the ghost of Copper in every corner of the house, but for the first time, he also saw the ghosts of his own children, alive, but no longer truly living. It wasn't about the model. It was never about the model, or the barking, or the holes in the garden. It was about his own broken pride. He had punished the dog for his own failures, sacrificing the most innocent member of their family on the altar of his own ego. He looked at his suffering family, at the wreckage he had single-handedly caused, and the walls of his self-pity finally crumbled. He didn't say a word. He didn't try to explain or apologize. Actions were the only currency that mattered now. He just grabbed his keys from the hook by the door and ran. The drive back to the shelter was a frantic, desperate prayer, a race against a clock he himself had set. Every red light was a personal torment, every slow car a thief of precious seconds. The shelter's closing time loomed in his mind like a guillotine. Please be there. Please be safe. Please don't let me be too late. He ran through the sterile, echoing hallways, the smell of disinfectant and despair filling his senses. He scanned cage after cage, his heart pounding with a terror far greater than any fear of unemployment. And then he saw him. Curled into a tight ball in the far corner of a concrete cell, smaller and sadder and older than he had ever seemed, was Copper. When the attendant opened the cage door, Mark knelt, his throat too tight to speak. For a moment, the dog just looked at him, his eyes full of a deep, weary confusion. Then, slowly, he uncurled, took a hesitant step forward, and licked the tear that was rolling down Mark's cheek. It was a gesture of absolute, unquestioning forgiveness. And in that moment, holding the warm, trembling body of the dog he had so profoundly betrayed, Mark finally broke. He wept, not for his lost job, but for his lost humanity, now mercifully, miraculously returned to him.
Copper's return didn't magically fix Mark's job situation or pay the overdue bills. It didn't erase the weeks of pain or instantly mend the deep fractures in the family's foundation. It did something far more important. It reopened the lines of communication. His presence, a warm and forgiving weight on the living room rug, forced a family broken by unspoken fears to finally talk, to finally look at each other and see not the source of their problems, but the source of their strength. The quiet conversation started that night. Mark, for the first time, spoke of his fear and his shame. Sarah spoke of her loneliness. Josh, seeing his father's vulnerability, finally lowered his own walls. And Emily, with Copper's head resting in her lap, began to draw again, her world slowly refilling with color. The dog had absorbed their rage and their grief, and in his silent, steady return, he brought back with him the one thing they had truly lost: hope. He wasn't just a dog.
He was their anchor in the storm, a living reminder that even when the structures we build for ourselves collapse, the bonds of family, all of it, are the one thing worth holding on to. He was the unspoken truth in a house full of lies, the steady heartbeat that called them all back home. This is the silent chord. We believe that sometimes the quietest members of our family have the most important things to say. If this story struck a chord with you, subscribe and join a community that listens.